to session 5 of Free Will. The question that's occupied many thinkers over the ages is, if God is a supreme being and human beings, how can they be free? And philosophers such as Sartre stated this: if human beings were truly free, God could not exist. And if God is supreme, then human beings are not free. However, his notion of being truly free is a notion of autonomy, that is, complete self-rule. But human freedom is not autonomy. Autonomy for human beings is really trying to reach beyond God. And that's what Adam and Eve wanted to do. We have a freedom, but it's freedom within limitations. So how can God be sovereign if we have a freedom of will? Well, he is. He is sovereign. He has plans for the world and he carries them out. Within this, we live and we make our choices. We make them freely, and God uses them, and then he works through them to achieve what he's planned. Now, we mentioned earlier in a session the story of Joseph and how Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt. It was an evil thing that they did, and their motive was pure jealousy. They wanted to get rid of him. A bad choice, certainly not a godly one. But God used this to work for good. Joseph was sold to the captain of the guard, Pharaoh's guard, and it so happened that this man's wife fancied Joseph, but when Joseph didn't go along with her advances, she made a very bad decision. She told lies about him and had him thrown into prison. But in prison, he was able to give interpretations to dreams that two of Pharaoh's servants had while they were there. Then Pharaoh had a dream and no one could tell him what it meant. And suddenly they remembered this Joseph in prison. And so he was able to interpret the dream and tell Pharaoh that there would be 7 years of good and then 7 years of famine. And so he was put in charge of storing up the grain. He was actually made Prime Minister of Egypt. When the famine came, it hit the area that his father and brothers were living in, and so they came down to Egypt to get food. To cut a long story short, they eventually settled in an area in the north of Egypt. Many years later, and a couple of pharaohs later, we find that these descendants of Joseph and his brothers were slaves to the Egyptians. And this begins the story first of Moses. Now the Pharaoh at the time made a bad decision. He said that all Hebrew boys should be killed at birth. But somehow Moses was kept from that. Not only that, he was actually brought up in the palace. And of course, Moses became the great leader that would lead them out of Egypt, out of slavery. And then began this revelation that God gave them of who he was as he took them through the desert and led them to the promised land. He'd made these people his people. He revealed himself to them. But this was the nation that then brought us Jesus. Jesus alone, who could rescue us from our sinful human nature. So it's a story that shows people freely making decisions, many of them not good. But God used them all to bring about his purpose of reconciling humanity to himself. God is sovereign over all. He uses our decisions, whether they're good or bad, to work out his purposes. God is sovereign, and we are free.
Change my